So welcome back. Today is day 2 of our conference on what Israel will look like in the year 2048. But for those of you who are just joining us, I am transporting you with this crystal ball to the year 2048, to the centennial of Israel, and to talk about what Israel will look like in 2048. We have our keynote speaker coming up, and to introduce him, I am going to introduce you to Dave Marchik. Oh, let me say who I am. I am, for those of you who are just joining us, I am Eran Carmel. I am at the Kogod School of Business here at American University. I'm going to introduce you to the Dean of the Kogod School of Business, to Dave Marchik. Dave has been our Dean for more than 2 years, and has led initiatives in entrepreneurship, in artificial intelligence, and in sustainability. He has come to us from the private sector and from government. He has been in a number of different places in business, including at Carlyle, the private equity firm, where he helped it to go public. He's worked in startups. He's worked in government, both in the Biden administration and in the Clinton administration. And he's worked for nonprofits. He is on the board of the Holocaust Museum. And most importantly, Dave, last summer, he biked clear across the country, all the way from California to Delaware, and he's lived to tell the story. Dave.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be here. The Center for Israel Studies just does a fantastic job on campus. I want to thank Michael and Laura. Alan Meltzer, I guess, is not here, but he was here. Thank you for him. And then also to Eran Carmel. He's a fantastic leader. I just want to give you one little shout out for Eran. So last year, we decided to really embrace AI at the Kogod School of Business under the view that our graduates need to learn AI to be more competitive in the market, because by the time they graduate, AI is going to be part of their daily lives. And so we went to Eran and said, can you give us a strategy? And he put together a strategy which we then adopted. And just last week, we got an award for having the #1 AI program in the country. So thank you, Eran. And then I see my friend Irv Chappell here, who is a colleague of mine on the board of the Holocaust Memorial Museum. They established the Chappell Center, which is basically kind of the archives for all the Holocaust materials from all over the world, and really has done a fantastic job. So thank you. And he's actually a student now at AU. He came back to be a history student. So Michael, I hope he's getting okay grades. It's a privilege to introduce Eugene Kandel, Professor Eugene Kandel. He's got a very, very impressive background. He originally told me was from Moscow, made Aliyah at 18, studied there, served in the Army, then came back to University of Chicago to get a PhD at the University of Chicago. He then became a professor at the University of Rochester, and then he made Aliyah again. So I guess it's an honor to make Aliyah, but not that many people get to do it twice, and so you've achieved that. He is an expert in exchanges, and he's worked with the NASDAQ for many years, and he's chair of the Israeli Stock Exchange. He was also chair of Startup Nation, Startup Israel. He served as economic advisor to the prime minister for, I think, 6 years, which is a pretty long time to be in government continuously. Most people don't last that long. And he basically was one of the architects of the Decade of Prosperity, which lasted until 2020. Eran tells me, as a futurist, that Professor Kandel is an out-of-the-box thinker, and he's thinking very strategically and in an unorthodox way about the future of Israel. And so it's a privilege to introduce him, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. I just need to apologize. 2 days ago, I couldn't speak at all. So I was even thinking of inviting the CEO of our organization from New York to come here this morning to speak instead of me. But so far, I'm okay, and I hope that within the next half hour, my voice manages. I must tell you that I'm a little bit offended for all of us with this demonstration. I thought this gathering warranted a serious demonstration. 30 people, lazily beating drums is not enough for me. I don't know. This is my first time, but I don't know. You should do better next time for Iran. For you, you should, motivate people better. I don't know. So anyway, yesterday, Professor Pasig presented a future after saying that futurists do not predict the future. But it was a scenario, and it said with 85% probability. So I want to talk about the other 15%. Okay, I agree with most of the things that he said. The only thing is that I think that we need to start worrying not about how optimistic or pessimistic we are, but how to prevent really bad outcomes. Yoel here did some of that, although he sort of put them on equal footing, and he had a prescription, except that this prescription doesn't depend on us. You basically said that U.S. government should do something about it. Well, we can decide on that. I'm going to talk about something that we Israelis and the Jewish people around the world can do on our own. We don't need permission from anybody else to actually eliminate some of the bad, not all of the disasters that can await us, but at least some of them that are homemade. So I presume that many of you know what a run on the bank is. Okay, a run on the bank is when think about a year and a half ago, there was Silicon Valley Bank. On January 1st, it was perfectly sound bank. On March 1st, it didn't exist. The only reason that it continued its existence is because the US government came and bailed it out. Basically said to everybody, don't worry, we won't. And you know what happened between its non-existing and the existing and non-existing? No ballistic missiles were involved. Nobody blew that up. There was some people, some companies who were holding deposits in that bank decided that maybe it wasn't anything sure. In the future, that bank will have trouble returning their money. That was it. It was enough for them to say, you know what? Just to be on the safe side, I'm going to call them up tomorrow and move my money to another bank. And after enough people did it, within a week, the bank collapsed. Okay? So that is the run on the bank. My first scenario, or our first scenario, is a run on the country. Let me try to explain this to you. So the run on the country is basically the same as run on the bank, except when enough people who are paying taxes, serving in the military, and doing all kinds of other things, some of them decide that maybe, just maybe, there's no future for them in their own country. And if they decide that, and many people decide that, and we're 10 million people country, it's enough about 15 to 20,000 to decide that. Okay, specific people, not random people. And basically, what's the next thing they want to do? The next thing they want to do is to be the first in Ben Gurion. Why? Because for the same reason for the run on the bank. Because their real estate is still expensive. They can get the money out of the country. And by the way, when they go and apply to citizenship or visa or something, work permit in another country, there's the people in front of them don't tell them that 500,000 other Israelis have been there before you. So go away. That means that if that group leaves, that risk is quite predictable. Okay, it can happen. I don't care whether you optimist or pessimist. I don't really care how much probability do you assign to this, as long as it's not zero. The problem with the run on the bank or run on the country is that the timing is not predictable. So we cannot say, well, when this starts happening, we'll deal with that. It doesn't work. The bank collapses, you have to solve the problem. That's why there are all these regulations and people keep excess capital, et cetera, in order to prevent this. Because when it starts, it's very, very quick and unpredictable, very rapid, and it spirals. Because the minute, remember in the movie Mary Poppins, the child wants his penny back, and somebody hears that, and there's a run on the bank on that, and bank collapses. And the last thing, it may be irreversible. You know, what does it mean irreversible? The Silicon Valley Bank, the only reason that it exists, that was the US government that bailed it out. On the run on the countries, nobody is going to bail us out. So how does that work? It works as following. Enough people leave, it's like an over-leveraged corporation. You have fixed costs, defense costs, subsidies, welfare, and then suddenly your tax base contracts. Okay? There's nothing new. Detroit experienced that, Chicago in the 60s and 70s, New York experienced that in the 70s. And then what do? Okay, you have some expenses you can't cut, and then you have not enough taxes. So you borrow, but then people stop believing you, and so you're in trouble. But what do you do as a country? You start raising taxes. If you start raising taxes, the remaining people are saying, okay, I've had enough with that. I'm going to leave. So you start a spiral. And that spiral, nobody knows where it ends. Okay? And on October 7, we got a first glimpse of where it ends. It's just that was a prelude. Because if this thing goes through, we're going to have October 7th 2 orders or 3 orders of magnitude larger. Okay, so that's the, I don't think it's the most probable scenario, but it's definitely the scariest. Okay? By the way, if Iran was smart, it would just let us do that. We will, because my claim here is that this scenario is self-made, it's homemade. We are doing this to ourselves very efficiently, very effectively, and very fast. Okay? And so in order to stop that and go to another scenario, we don't need anybody's permission. It's not like Theodor Herzl needs to go and speak to both the German emperor and the Turkish sultan. We just need to decide. So if this is really the worst scenario, and I think it's the worst, shouldn't it be our top priority, regardless of our political affiliation? Well, let me tell you something that I can tell you with absolute certainty because I spent 6 years in the government where I set up a group that was supposed to deal with that. Not just that, any strategic risk management type of issues. There's even a government resolution from the end of 2012 that appoints National Economic Council to be that group in the government. When I left in 2015, my successor basically wasn't interested, and then they died immediately. So there is no agency, no political forum, no government organization that thinks about strategy or risk management. So this problem is ignored. We are in denial. By the way, interestingly, that not just the government is in denial, a lot of people are in denial. Okay, I'll talk about this later on. But you know what's the difference between no risk management and risk management? I'll give you very, very stark examples. Did you see what happened with ballistic missiles that came to us? And we intercepted a whole bunch of them? Do you think it just happened? There were 20 years of very, very targeted risk management process. It was expensive. We have 5 layers of defenses. We didn't just say, well, 1 layer is enough. And we are ready because we understood the risk, evaluated it, and got prepared. It's not hermetic, but it works. The counterexample is October 7th. There was no risk management whatsoever. It was, in Hebrew, it says, "Yeh beseder." It will be okay. Okay? Those of you who went to Hebrew school, yeah, come on. It's fine. They deterred. Yeah, we bought them. Just, I'm not going to go into military stuff, but it's the extreme case of not risk management at all. So these are the differences. But at least in the military, you have organizations, by the way, that started in Israel in 1973 after we've been really kicked in the groin and lost a lot of people. Those organizations appeared and survived that deal with risk management. On the civilian side, we have none. So the point is simple. We must move to the risk management mode. And I don't care, again, I don't care. People tell me, no, we're more optimistic than you are. I said, I'm neutral. I don't care whether you assign 3% probability to this or 15% probability to this. What is the cost for you of losing a country and in the process having, I don't know, 100,000 Jews killed? What does it cost to you? Okay? Ask yourself, do you really care? Are you willing to take this risk with 3% probability because you don't believe that it's 15? I don't think it's a reasonable approach. We need to remove that because it's all on us. And the point is that the scenario that I am presenting to you, and Yoel here is an expert on Iran, and there are others, they would tell you that Iran is not trying to nuke us purposely. Maybe it will happen. He's trying to run a war on attrition with us. And through that war, he wants a whole bunch of people to say, we've had enough, and leave. That's exactly what we're doing. So we're actually fighting Iran militarily and helping it to achieve its goals internally. If Iran was smart, they would just let us do it. Why spend all this money on Hezbollah? So the question is, are we winning the battle and losing the war? Let's move to the next scenario. The next scenario is actually a much more optimistic one. So I can win, by the way, in your voting, I can win the most pessimistic and the most optimistic at the same time. Okay. So we're looking for, Israel has the ability and all the components of being a prosperous and resilient, vis-a-vis Iran and all other threats, resilient. And by the way, it just occurred to me when Yoel was speaking, thank you, by the way, for giving me this idea, is that resiliency is not just for our own consumption. And I think Nimrod also. Resiliency, you have to show resiliency in the region so they will believe you that you don't go anywhere. And the minute our neighbors will understand that we're not going anywhere, that we're not like Algeria in the 60s, if they understand that, we're going to have a new Middle East. Because the entire neighborhood, well, some already don't believe that we're leaving, but many, like Hamas, and even many Palestinians, believe that we're not going to be there. We should show resilience. What we're doing instead, we're actually destroying it very effectively and showing everybody that we're doing that. So how do you build a resilient country? It's 4 pillars. One pillar is cohesive society. Cohesive society means that I'm willing to take risks for you, and you're willing to take risks for me. I understand you. We're together in not just when we're making money, but when we have to go to war or when there are difficulties, and we understand that we are the same. We can have very big differences, but we're still the same. I'm going to go over these things in the 2 scenarios. The competitive economy, somebody has to finance both the security, because it's very costly, and the more peace agreements we sign, the security becomes even costlier, but at the same time, maintaining high standard of living for the Israelis so they don't leave. Okay? So you have to have a very, very competitive economy. We're not in a great shape there, but we have a lot of potential. We do have to have competent government, which can identify strategic opportunities and risks and implement effective and timely policies to address them. Well, like I said, today, they not only don't implement the policies, kick the can down the road is the modus operandi of the Israeli government. And I'm telling you, I've been there for a long time, and I've been advising them for even longer. And the last part is comprehensive security, which is built today. We talked about regional alliances, and it's all great. I mean, we have to do that. And of course, it has to be built on defense capabilities. But the first three are necessary conditions for the fourth. So what I'm going to try to convince you that we systemically destroy the first three. Structurally, Israel is structured in such a way that we are destroying them, and increasingly so. So let's go to cohesive society. So in scenario one, we have three incompatible value systems, okay? Within the population, why is it not? Okay. All legitimate, which is, when I say that these three sets of values are all legitimate, I get attacked from every side, because everybody thinks that only their views are legitimate and everybody else is a jerk or a moron or completely wants to destroy Israel. But the problem is that these three value sets are completely incompatible. They are in clash with each other. Not a little bit, on almost everything. So there are three values, and it's Jewish democratic vision, on which Jabotinsky, Ben-Gurion, Herzl, and Begin could have agreed. It's nothing particularly radical here. Basically says that Jewish means broad definition of how I want to be Jewish, whether it's definition of Judaism or definition of Jewishness. You know, in Soviet Union, we didn't have Judaism almost at all, and yet we all stayed Jewish. Not all, well, of course, but and then there is, of course, I want to live in a liberal democracy where there is equality, where there's due process, where there's limits on the government power, etc. Okay, that's one group. The second group says Jewish democratic, but in fact, it's basically Torah nationalistic vision, because they say Jewish, what it means to be Jewish has been determined a very long time ago. So there is one way to be Jewish, and there's no other way. The second part, they say democracy, of course. Whoever wins elections rules. There are no limitations. And the liberal democracy is unacceptable to that, is unacceptable, unacceptable to that group. What I was speaking to. This thing didn't work? Okay. You should have, you should have told me that. Anyway, so it basically says, look, this group cannot accept liberal democracy as a principle. And I'm not criticizing them. I'm just making a statement, which they make all the time. They say, look, it is an impossibility when Torah law interpreted by certain rabbis clashes with the liberal democracy. Torah law wins every time. There's just it's not a question. It's a fact. And so, by the way, they say, look, liberal democracy is the invention of the Christians, you know, all these Scotsmen in the 17th century. We have 3,000 years of our own morals. Why do we care about this? Okay, so you cannot really sort of bring them on the common ground. They talk it different. They start from different axioms. It's like asking, you know, Euclidean, non-Euclidean geometry. You can't prove the same theorems because the assumptions are different. And then there is one small group, which is about maybe 12, 13, 14% of the population, that says, look, with all due respect, all this Jewish stuff is not acceptable to us. About 50% of the Arab community, and it's again, completely legitimate, they say, we're not Zionists, we'll never be Zionists. But about 50% of the population say, we don't care. But 50% of the population say, we do care. We don't want to be Zionist. We want to be a country for all citizens. More democratic, less democratic, it's a different story. But these three groups cannot come to a compromise over their values. Because you can't have a country which is liberal democracy on odd days and Torah nationalistic on even. That's not happening. So basically, you have, add to that, these three groups exist. And the demography is moving one of these groups, the Torah nationalistic, it's constantly growing, much faster, about 3 times faster than the rest. Okay? Just the Haredi, which are part of that group, they double themselves every 16 years. Okay? It's one of the highest growth rates in human history. Now, but you add to that the system that says we have one lever, okay? And whoever wins the elections pulls the lever to themselves. They change. You know that Israel changes. We don't have a constitution, which is another problem. But in Israel, there is what's called basic laws, which sort of together comprise a constitution. How many amendments the U.S. Constitution has? 22? 22, 23. I'm not a big, so that number. In one session of Knesset, basic laws are changed much more than that. In one session, that's usually 2 years, 2 or 3 years. Okay, so we definitely don't have constitution, so there is instability, and it's sort of winner takes all. So I won, my time to feed. I'm going to move it here, and again, it's not about this government or the other government. It's any government, because that's the system. So these two together create a war in defense of values. Okay, because I want to defend my values. How more justified can you be? Nobody attacks, everybody feels attacked. Every large population in Israel feels attacked. Why? Because the values clash. And so when I defend mine, I attack yours. I don't feel that I attack you. I feel that I'm defending. And you feel that you're defending. But we're never going to stop this war because everybody feels completely morally obliged to defend their values. And so this is, if you look at this slide, you already see the direction to a solution. Because you can't change the population. Well, you can, I've already heard some people talking about expelling parts of Jewish population from Israel. But let's move it aside. The only thing you can do is to change winner takes all. That's, there are two things that lead to a war. This war is unwinnable, and this war is you cannot come to a peace agreement. So what we do is we need to have all the values protected. Because only then, if the values are protected, I feel that nobody's threatening my value and my children are not under the threat of some kind of foreign influence, I will stop defending them. That's the only way. And the second, so it's sort of like live and let live. You'll practice your world, I'll practice my world. And there is once you do that, and we don't afraid of each other, we are not afraid of each other, sorry, we can start collaborating on things we actually have in common. But once you collaborate with people, you establish trust rather than animosity and fear. So the next thing, this thing is going to be, this, if we continue, is going to get worse and worse because the war is going to be dominated by demography. This is not affected by demography. Then the next thing is competitive economy. The system today, first of all, we don't have any strategy or risk management in general. So, but the worst thing that is happening is that we cannot possibly have a competitive economy within 10 to 20 years. It's already structurally impossible. You know why? Because we have groups, large groups of population in Israel, that basically decide on how they're going to live. And the representative of one of these groups said that in an interview several times. He said, we're going to decide how we live, and you're going to pay for it. Okay? And there's not one group, there are at least three. So these three groups basically say, we have our principles, but we're not willing and not able to pay for these principles, so you pay for these principles. The problem is these three groups, or even more, they are growing, whereas the other group is shrinking. So when it was a small minority, that could have worked. Imagine that you have a country that is 60% Amish. Okay, can you sustain modern economy with a country that is 60% Amish? And Amish, you know, I have no problem with Amish. I mean, just giving you an example of people who don't use electricity. Let's try to run a modern economy with that. That's roughly the same thing. So you structurally cannot have a competitive economy. And before the war, our estimate was about 25 to 30 years. The war added about $500 billion shekels of additional expenditure, which falls on the same group that actually pays 90% of these subsidies, which is the top 10% of earners of Jewish non-Haredi population. We have to, create a professional government, but that's from the next slide. We have to have a mandated fiscal responsibility. It's completely legitimate for you to have any lifestyle you want as a group, as long as you can pay for it. You cannot, the problem is, how do you do that in one swoop? Because so many decisions were made in the past that make some of these groups completely unsustainable. So you have to have subsidies to account for past decisions, but you don't want subsidies that basically cover any decision in the future. So you have to come up with a fixed subsidy that allows them to survive and change, and no subsidy going forward, no additional subsidy going forward, okay? These are, again, it's all about us deciding. The next one is competent government. Israeli government is structurally incompetent. Okay, it's not, I'm not saying that all of them are incompetent, and by definition, every minister and every director general, in some cases, they they are potentially competent, but imagine yourself investing in a company, and I'm telling you that this company's CEO has no expertise. Let's say it's a real estate company, okay? Has no expertise in real estate, has no experience in real estate, couldn't care less is he's literally interested in another job, and therefore you couldn't care less whether your real estate company goes bankrupt or not. And the last thing is that most of his time, he's actually pursuing that other job. Would you invest in that company? Okay? And the answer is obvious. I'm not even, this is a rhetorical question, but for some reason, I don't know why, we believe that putting ministers who have no experience, or incentive to succeed and spend most of their time on their re-election, because remember, incentives in the US, it's a bit different. If the president screws up, he's not re-elected, or his party is not re-elected. In Israel, the chances of re-election of a specific minister have nothing to do with the success in the post where he or she was before. That's known and understood by everybody. It is dependent on how many pork bellies they can give to various constituencies that affect primaries, etc. It's not that different from here, but it's there, it's on federal level, and the federal level is everything. So as a result, the public mistrusts any government 5 minutes after electing it. I mean, literally, it doesn't matter which government. It doesn't matter whether you voted for that government, you still mistrust it. We need a professional, non-political government which is accountable and works for the public and can be removed from, oops, I think I went, that was, right, because today the government is part of that fight. Okay, so when you solve the previous problem of protecting the values, the governments can calm down and start working for the citizens rather than working on the fight. So anyway, the system stability under today's system, I already told you, you can change everything at whim, unless 500,000 people come out to demonstrate, in which case you postpone it by a couple of months. And the idea is to have a system where the core rules of the game are protected. How do we do that? First of all, let's talk about when we present these challenges, what do we get as a response? We get 5 responses. The first one is denial. And the interesting thing, it doesn't matter whether you're on the right or on the left. It's just on the right, you say, if Bibi is the prime minister, there are no problems. If somebody on the left, it says if Bibi is not prime minister, there are no problems. Everything will fall in place. In both cases, it's complete denial because nobody deals with the true causes of the problem. The other one is let's negotiate. This is sort of what I call kumbaya type of thing. We'll sit down, we figure it out, we're all together, etc. I don't know how you can have a discussion of I have to have liberal democracy and you cannot live in a federal liberal democracy. How can we figure out a way to live in semi-liberal democracy? I don't know. And by the way, even if we come to a truce, within several decades, the demography will change and then there will be complete overhaul of that truce. The third thing is we fight. Levin and Rothman on the one side, Kaplan demonstrations on the other side. They all want to win. It's not clear what do you win. It's like, think about the autoimmune disease. Do you care whether the white cells won or red cells won? The person is dead. Does it matter who won? You're going to kill the body by fighting. But everybody, it sounds like very appealing. Let's fight and let's win. There's a separation. So we are done with you. We don't want to be near you. Judea and Israel will pass. You can see people drawing maps, more elaborate, less elaborate. Let's do it simply. Let's do it. Yeah? Okay, let's try that. I think Yoel will tell you what that will do to our defense system. But even in the process of these changes, you're going to have a civil war on your hands. And then you have flight, which is the biggest danger. People say, okay, we're done. We're buying property in Greece, Cyprus, Singapore, New Zealand, Portugal, US. Remember that a lot of Israeli citizens have foreign passports, and a lot of them got them in the last couple of years. Okay? I think Portugal has now the most citizens in Israel. I mean, half of my neighborhood now has Portuguese passports. So this is the most dangerous because that's the sign that people are on the verge of losing hope. We offer a risk management approach. Before you fight, before you hope for 10 years to agree on something, before you separate Israel and have a civil war, let's think about having a procedural arrangement that will allow us to live together. Okay? Okay. Well, unfortunately, there's already hostility, a lot of people preparing to leave. But the problem is the discourse is focused on values and is dominated by purists on all sides. And I'm equally critical of all the purists because it's our way or nothing. And we are saying that our main goal is to prevent scenario 1, okay, the run on the country. I don't care. I want the practical approach. Let's accept the reality, and since we can't change people, let's change the system. It's our decision. We don't have to ask permission from anybody. We don't even have to invest a lot of money to do that. Let's just think about it and do something. And we, being pragmatic, let's go and learn from other countries. So 2 countries come to mind. One country has been doing this for, they started thinking about it and trying to arrange it in the 13th century. It wasn't particularly successful, but since 1848, they've been quite successful in doing that. Now, what's the difference between the unitary system and the Federalist system? The unitary system is where we replace the parliament, the king with the parliament, and we give the power to the king came from God, and the power to the parliament comes from the voters. But the rest is the same. I need to drink. I'm almost out of voice, but So basically, we give all the power to the top, and then they decide how much of it trickles down. Okay? This is a good way of coordinating activity if everybody agrees on the basic principles, right? Because we're all basically saying, look, you guys know what we want, so go and coordinate and give us what we want. Power is delegated down, and Israel, incidentally, is the most centralized country in the OECD. So they don't really release any power anywhere. There is a different system which Swiss perfected. This is a 3-layer system which says the power flows not from the top to the bottom, but the bottom to the top. It basically says, let's adopt something called subsidiarity principle. It says, whatever I can do locally in my commune, I don't want to give anybody else power to do that. I don't want somebody in the Ministry of Interior to decide whether I can have, I don't know, how many hours I work or how many, all kinds of things like that, how, where the buses will go, et cetera, et cetera. This is my stuff. I decide on that. If it's not reasonable to do it on the commune level, I pass it to the canton level. Okay, and the canton level does medical, does all kinds of incentive schemes, employment, some welfare, etc. And then some systems are too big to be run on the canton level because some of the cantons are too small. In Israel and Switzerland, by the way, are the same size countries, about 10 million people. You know how many cantons are in Switzerland? 23. So they're pretty small, some of them. They have their own tax policy. They have their own welfare policy. They have a lot of stuff. So only things like monetary policy, military, foreign policy go up. You know what's the size of the Swiss government? The Israeli government today has 38 ministers. Swiss government has 7. Okay? And they rotate to be prime minister. Okay? That's it. Every year. They rotate. I mean, there's no, because they have only very limited things to do. And so the power is delegated up. Why is it good? Because if this community and this community are very, very different, one is Catholic, another is Protestant, and they speak different languages, they want different things. So they don't need somebody's permission to tell them that they can run their lives as they want them. Okay? This is a very, very simple change. You just, instead of giving all the power to the top, you give only the power to the top that you want them to have. It doesn't sound like a very complicated system. So here's what we do to modify this system. Because we can't split Israel into geographical cantons. There will be a fight that nobody will ever finish. So instead, we say, okay, let's create a procedural, not value-based, but procedural constitution that sets the rules of our engagement with each other. And that constitution says we're going to create 3 different administrative units. We call them aluma. Aluma means ray of light. Okay, so think of this like 3 things where you can gather And every citizen must choose one. Why do we choose three? Because they correspond to the sets of values over which people are willing to go to war. So we say, instead of going to war, just choose your own aluma and stay in it with people who think like you. And the rules of the game in that aluma will be according to your preferences. Okay? That's the first thing. The second thing, and each aluma will have a constitution, so you can't sort of start fiddling with it like we do today. But the constitutions are no longer, you don't need to fight on over the constitution, because you can never agree on values across these three groups, but you definitely can agree on values within these groups. The second thing that happens is that you have, these alumot are virtual. They're not based on territory. They're based on values. So every person chooses one. They don't have to move. They don't have to change anything in their daily life. The second thing is that all political elections are done within alumot. So instead of fighting in politics across values, you discuss, how do you want to, I don't know, what is it, the size of the budget? Do you want more welfare, less welfare? Stuff that is important, but people don't go to war over it, okay? And you don't need to fight over values. The Knesset is Israeli parliament, for those of you who may not know that, is no longer elected. It is appointed. And since it's appointed proportionally to the number of people that chose each aluma, it's a one man, one vote. It's the same thing. There's no restriction of democracy. But since Knesset is no longer political, there are no elections, the government doesn't have to be, federal government doesn't have to be political. In fact, it cannot be political. So you get professional government out of that immediately. And the government can be changed without causing the government to fall. But it only has certain responsibilities that, according to this subsidiarity principle that I mentioned earlier. And then the last thing is that most of the taxation is done within alumot. So you cannot tell anybody that my aluma will choose the way we live and another aluma will pay for it. That's no longer possible. There will be a subsidy for 20, 30 years, it doesn't matter. And so weaker alumot will not have to collapse, but they will have to change their leadership. Because today, the leadership of these alumot is mostly interested in grabbing the bigger part of the pie that somebody else generates. They are not at all interested in increasing the pie of their population. So a different leadership will be needed. And the last thing that ensures stability is that all the major changes in the federal constitution must be approved by all alumot. So you cannot change them at will. You have to bring win-win-win proposal to change it, okay? So that ensures stability. Now, what does that do? The next example is Belgium example, because you can say, look, you can't move from unitary to federalist. There are many federalist countries, including this one. First of all, after the Second World War, 3 countries were forcibly moved to federalist system, Germany, Spain, and Italy, because they wanted to distribute power. But there's one example, and many other countries are federalist, but there's one example that we like. It's Belgium. Belgium passed a constitution, it was constitutional monarchy, from 1830. And in that constitution, the Valons, the French-speaking part of the population, had a lot of special privileges because they were richer, there were more of them, etc. But the composition of the population is changed. And so after 140 years as a unitary constitutional monarchy, the Belgian parliament said that this system no longer serves the interests of Belgian people. They passed this resolution and they moved. they created a federalist country. The only problem is that they moved too little. And so 20 years later, problems arose. So they had to move a bit more. Then 20 years later, they had no government for 2 years because they couldn't agree on a bunch of stuff. So they had to do another set of changes. What does that teach us? But that did prevent the federal system. Sorry, but federal system did prevent Belgium from splitting into two countries, which was what everybody was predicting. By the way, what we're proposing, almost the exact model, was proposed in 1900 by two people, one communist and one very conservative, in Austro-Hungarian Empire. And they saw it as a way to save the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It was not accepted. Austro-Hungarian Empire fell. I don't know whether it would have not fallen with that, but that's the fact. And then one of them became the president of Austria. So what we're saying is that it's been proposed. By the way, similar system was proposed by a well-known Haredi rabbi almost 30 years ago. So nothing new under the sun. And what we're saying is that we need to learn a couple of messages from Belgium. Lesson one is that it's doable. It's just a decision, nothing else. And then the other one, if you do it already, do it well. You know, do it all at once. You know, like, Machiavelli said that when you come to a city and you conquer it, kill all the people that you want to kill in the first day. Okay, why? Because otherwise everybody will be afraid that you will kill them. And this way you can kill everybody and then tell them, I've killed everybody that I wanted to kill. So now from now you can be calm and collaborate with me. Different experience, but sort of fits this. You don't want to do it piecemeal. So it's inevitable. The outcome that we're trying to prevent is very bad. And it's doable, it's been done, it's reasonable. So let's do it. Thank you.
Eugene, thank you so much. How's your voice? All right, I'm gonna take one or two questions from the audience very quickly. Very, very urgently, and we will start with any students here. We always traditionally start with the students. Yes, please.
How is Israel different from people in the United States where we live?
It's very simple. No matter what you do in your political system, the United States will still exist in 25 years. I can't say that for Israel. We may disappear. That's the main difference. That's why a lot of people tell me, look, but what you're saying is common to many countries. I don't care about many countries. I care about our country, and our country is the only one in the world that faces the threat of extinction. And so we have to take this seriously.
All right, I see one of my students out here. Owen, quick question.
Wait, get a mic.
Your policies seem reasonable and well-founded, but is there wide support for them in the Israeli government, which would need to implement them? How do you think that might be put into their government so that they might implement the policies?
Like I said, the Israeli government has no concept of thinking forward. You know, on the 8th of October last year, not on the 7th, on the 8th, Israeli government was completely dysfunctional. Any state functions were absent. And so the people of Israel looked around and said, well, it's on us. And we even things like sending buses to evacuate people from Sderot, it was done by private citizens who drove back and forth. And I'm not talking about the military part. I mean, military part is a separate story. You can organize, 200, 500 buses on a notice. You can organize ahead of time hotels and assign if there is evacuation. Doesn't have to be. But if there is evacuation, you go to that hotel with this company that brings you a bus. It's as simple. You don't need a PhD in physics in order to figure that out. But it's not done. You look at the if you look at the Israel has an agency called Rachel. Rachel is called Agency for National Emergencies. Okay, there's an agency that deals with national emergencies. In Corona, that agency was not employed. They just pushed this aside, did something else. Mossad created the Command and Control Center together with some other units. That's ridiculous. Now, it wasn't deployed either. I mean, what does that tell you about it? Even the agency exists, but it's not functional. So basically, we have very little trust in the government as a political side of the government. We believe that we have to start working with the voters to force them to create these changes, because by themselves, it's not possible, in my opinion.
Laura, I think we should. All right.
I
One
was
last
gonna-
question then.
Sorry, I was gonna ask. I know with Switzerland, some of the canton. Oh, it's on. Okay, okay. I know with Switzerland, some of the canton systems had problems, especially in maybe 30, 40 years ago, with a lot of conservatives. For example, like women only gained the right to vote in one Swiss canton in I think 1992. How do you think that there could be something like provisions, human rights provisions, baked into the constitutions of the Alumot to make sure that nothing of that sort would happen?
I'm going to say something very, very hard to hear. If we do we think that there is a high probability that Israel will remain a democratic, liberal democratic country over the next, let's say, 30 years? The answer is no. Because when a big part of the population does not want to have a democratic country, what can you do? Okay, so now you can say, well, but democracy is morally superior. By saying that, and saying that I have, under this title, the right to impose something on others, what it does, it gives others, under a different title, the right to impose something on you. So the whole idea behind this is accept the fact that we have so different axioms that we start from, and that there are sidewalks over which women cannot walk today in various neighborhoods. Cannot, and they would not walk. Or that women sit in the back in the bus of certain buses, and they will continue sitting back. I had a funny story with my wife coming into such a bus and sitting in the front. And when somebody told her that she has to go to the back, she told him where he can go, very clear terms. And then immediately 3 other Haredi women sat next to her because it changed the equilibrium. But that's a side story. So we cannot do anything about it. If we insist that our values become their values, what's going to happen is their values will become the values of the country, and we're going to be gone. So we have to abandon that hope. Which hope we can have is that people who care about liberal democracy in Israel can have a country in which they can live in liberal democracy. It's a very different story. It's painful to hear, but unfortunately it's a fact. It's either one or the other. There's what you would like to have, and I would like to have too, is not going to happen.
Eugene, Kandel, thank you very much. Please join me in thanking